So there have been, okay, can I have silence please? There have been complaints from among you that some of you cannot hear because there is too much talking. Okay, so in the next part of this lecture, actually all the videos unfortunately are for this part. So we are going to begin with, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you this short clip on fraternal polyandry first as an example of a marriage practice and a kind of marriage, and then we are going to discuss marriage practices.
Amar and Kundan are brothers. Now in their 40s, they have lived together almost their entire lives in the hills of Himachal Pradesh. They share just about everything. Amar and Kundan are brothers. Now in their 40s, they have lived together almost their entire lives in the hills of Himachal Pradesh. They share just about everything: their work, their home, and a wife.
Tell me about your wedding day.
We have a simple wedding, Kundan says. There is a bride and a groom, and the younger brother is simply attached to the elder brother. And this is their wife, Indira Devi. The trio have worked side by side as husbands and wife for more than 25 years. It's been going on for ages. My sister-in-law has 2 husbands. My mother-in-law also has 2 husbands, she says. It's called fraternal polyandry, where the brothers of one family are all married to the same woman. It's not common in most of India, but still flourishes in remote parts of the Himalayas.
There are about 200 families in this steep hillside village that function pretty much the same, although some wives have 3 or 4 husbands, depending on how many brothers there are.
Typically, the marriages are arranged.
What about love? Do you love both of these husbands equally, or was this just for tradition?
I like both of them. I look at them the same. When I am in trouble, I come to the very same house. But they won't. What they do want is children of their shared life.
This is a bit embarrassing, but how do you deal with sex at night?
That we have to work out. We make shifts, change shifts, and sleep on alternate days.
Is it difficult to have to share a wife between the 2 of you?
To run the families, we have to do this, overcome the hurdles, and we have to control our hearts from feeling too much also. But feelings grow, and so did their family. They have 3 adult children now, who all live and work together in the same house.
Do you know which child belongs to which biological father?
We tell the kids that both fathers are the same. The family doesn't know and doesn't care. The daily grind takes all their time and energy. Everything is carried by head and hand. Life is simple. And most villagers do hard labor on their tiny plots of inherited land. Younger brother Kumar breaks stones for a living in his backyard and at a mine. His wife does backbreaking work in the fields, careful not to step on snakes.
In this difficult terrain with few jobs available and very little land to share, one of the reasons that polyandry is popular here is because of pure economics.
The practice goes back centuries because land is so scarce in this hill country. If Amar and Kundan had taken separate wives, they might have had to split the family's little land. So they stick to tradition.
You want this tradition to continue with your 3 children?
I feel it is good for my daughter to have 2 husbands, she says. If they marry like that, they will be happy in the future. Her 17-year-old daughter isn't so sure about that.
How many husbands would you like? 1, 2, or 3?
I would like 1 husband, she says. But in this remote corner of India, Sunita Pundir knows she is bound by custom.
Will you marry for love or you will marry for tradition?
I will marry for both, for tradition as well as for love. I will never leave our tradition, even if I have to forego love. I will never spoil my parents' reputation and my brother's. Sunita's two brothers have already decided they will follow tradition and share a wife. My opinion is that in a family there should be a joint system, he says. The joint system is very good. Family runs very well that way. To find one, they'll have to travel to another village. The gene pool here is too small. The villagers say almost everyone here is related in some way. There's another incentive for polyandry. For every 1,000 boys born in this region, there are about 850 girls. As education and India's rapid modernization seep into this hill country, though, its ancient traditions may fade away. Until then, life for these villagers will be much the same as it was for their forefathers and mothers hundreds of years ago. Sarah Sidhu, CNN, Himachal Pradesh, India.
So through this, we can enter into our discussion on marriage. And again, we will try to look at some of the conceptual issues around marriage and take up the example of Nair marriage, which I think will also address some of the questions you were raising when we discussed Nair kinship. Now, you know, what is the, it's very difficult to find that one thing that one can say which is typical to all marriages. Is marriage about the union between males and females? Yes and no. We saw in your marriage itself the fact of marriage between two women. We know now that in many countries the legalization of marriage between gay and lesbians then makes this, and just I think today I read in the papers that they were altering the definitions of marriage and so on in the dictionary to sort of include these changes. Is marriage about sexual union? Again, in some cases it may not be about sexual union either. Is it about legitimizing children? It does not. Is it about residing in a common place? That also is not true. So generally speaking, we can't come to a conclusion about what those characteristics are that will define all marriages. The one thing that we can say, however, is that it involves emotionally charged relationship between spouses and creates in-laws. So by that logic, what we are really saying is that marriage as an institution creates this wider system of family and a wider kinship network. And therefore it is the mechanism through which alliance is made, and it is the mechanism through which these two groups of wife givers and wife takers are created. There are three types of marriage that we need to focus on at this point. Monogamy, which you're all familiar with. Polyandry, the example that you just saw, which again we realize that, and again I think it's very significant if you think of the kinds of questions, and this was a CNN short documentary, and you think of the kinds of questions that were being asked, they were being asked from the perspective of a person who believes in the monogamous union, right? Or serial monogamy at least. So the fact is that the kind of things that we think are funny or that we laugh at are actually those, and the kinds of questions that she was asking are actually reveal some of the biases that we have through our own experiences of that institution. You have so that was polyandry, where there's one woman and two or more men, and polygyny, where you have one man and two or more women. Now, as an example of marriage, we want to discuss the Nair marriage. And Nair women typically underwent two types of marriages. One was what is called the Thali tying ceremony, and the second was the Sambandhan. Now, at the prepubescent age, all the Nair girls who were in that age were brought together and according to the rules of that lineage, they were married to, there was a tali tying ceremony with an acceptable partner, right? So acceptable in terms of the norms of the caste group and so on. And after this tali tying ceremony, or the tali tying marriage, the woman was free to have sexual relations with any man she chose. And this is the concept of the visiting husband or the sambandhan. So there are really like two kinds of marriages, and the tali tying marriage is in that sense more of an enduring tie than the visiting husbands. But the visiting husbands were often provided the context for the procreative ties. So after the tali tying ceremony, the woman was free to engage in these relations with other men, provided that he was of her own caste or of a higher caste. Now, these men were considered her husbands, though there were no religious ceremonies, so there was no ceremonial and ritualistic content that was attached to these relationships. And there was a system of sharing of husbands which was in place. So typically a man could have more than one husband, and like you saw in the fraternal polyandry film, where within the family there is a system of sharing. So even among the Nayars, they came up with systems of sharing. For instance, husbands would visit their wives at night after dinner, and they would return to their own homes. And whenever they visited their wives, they would leave their weapons or things outside the wife's room in order to suggest that nobody else should come at that time. So in that sense, there was a kind of system in place by which husbands would take turns to visit their wives. The other example that I had given was of, so when a woman was pregnant, then all the men that she was with would actually end up, giving her gifts and in a symbolic way claiming the father's status, even though the father's status was not a significant one in this context. Now, interestingly, what happens is, again, when you look at it from the context of our own society and our own practices, this kind of a system. Sorry, I forgot to put this on. Okay, this kind of a system suggests some kind of, reflects a sanctioning of casual sex or a sanctioning of promiscuity, but actually this really was not so. There were norms attached to what was possible in terms of sexual relations that people were engaging in. Now, in this context, then the marriage between two individuals, Kathleen Goff describes as the slenderest of ties. Because it was not children were not involved in the marriage, ties with children were not involved between the husband and the wife. There were no economic interests involved, nor was common in residence a point within the marriage. So in that sense, if you look at the kinds of things that typically when we think of monogamy, the kind of things that bind a marriage and put them in place, children, common residence, a familial structure, that all these things were absent in the case of the Nayar marriage, thereby making it a very weak link. Also, there were no enduring ties between husband and wife. There was no enduring relationship between father and children. What was strong was the bond between the mother and the son, as we have seen in there. So as a result of this kind of weakness of marriage, what we find is that strong ties between mother and son, and strong ties between the brother and the sister. And this link between the strong link between the brother and the sister was the way in which the problem of authority was resolved. The fact that the inheritance was through the matriline and that authority was through the male line, this was resolved by the attachment of the brother and the sister. At the back, the third row from the back, the three of you, do you want to break up that group? If you're too tempted, maybe you should break it up. Can one of you come down here in front of me? The one who's sitting on the stair. Yeah, you. Down here. Thank you. Okay, so okay, so like I said again, you know, this should not suggest that this is a reflection of promiscuity, because there were norms against you know, transgression of caste boundaries, for instance. So if the Nair women chose to have sexual relations with lower caste men, this would lead to dishonor within the larger group, within the whole group, and this was not something that was permitted. Okay, now if you think of marriage in India, one of the fundamental things that I think that we must talk about is the fact of bride price and dowry, so that any discussion on marriage in India and what's happening to marriage in India now is incomplete without looking at bride price and dowry. Now, fundamentally what marriage does is that it links to social groups. So like this point of wife givers and wife takers, it's a relationship of exchange between these two groups. And the exchange in this case, see, whenever you all sit like that, you're not talking. So the relationship is between two groups, and the exchange is not just exchange of women, it's along with the exchange of women, it's exchange of goods and services that happens. So the marriage is typically accompanied by, you know, rituals, by public festivities, and by this kind of exchange of goods and services. Now, bride price is a transfer of resources from the groom's family to the bride's, presuming that the bride has productive capacity, which is being given over to another family. So it's a kind of payment for the productive capacity of the bride, which is now going into the groom's family. Now, you will find that actually, you know, what has happened is bride price has gradually made its way for dowry. So everywhere, increasingly, there is no more bride price, but there is dowry. And even when where it is there, it is only there in a sort of very nominal kind of sense. So dowry is the gift to the bride or couple by the girl's parents for the setting up of their new conjugal estate. So it's interesting because it is still, it's articulated in terms of a gift which is given to the couple, right? So, but as we all know that that gift is in terms of, because it's in terms of setting up conjugal estate, it can range from different items of use to cash, to you know, to jewelry, to all these other things. So one of the issues around dowry has been that it is considered to be pre-mortem inheritance. Now, inheritance is, when you say pre-mortem, inheritance is after death, right? You inherit something when the person dies and you inherit. Now, this dowry has been considered to be pre-mortem inheritance, which means even before the death of the parent, a part of the estate is actually being transferred over to the daughter at the time of marriage, right? And often dowry is being justified as this kind of pre-mortem inheritance. And many sociologists argue that this is not so, and this is problematic precisely because, one, the dowry that is given does not represent a fixed share of a particular divisible estate. So whenever a dowry is given, it is not given in terms of a calculation of this is the estate and this is how much the share of one person is, and therefore this is how much should go to the daughter. It is often given as by way of gifts, often given by way of demand, right? More often given by way of demand and gift. So it's not, it does not represent a fixed share as would when you think of inheritance. So at the time of death, inheritance would mean dividing the entire worth of property between the inheritors. Secondly, it is not, okay, can you please stop talking? Secondly, it is not paid to the bride herself, right? It is paid to the bride's family, right? It's not something that goes to the bride herself, but to the family. And women then become the transmitters of the wealth. They are not the owners of the wealth. So it's actually the exchange of goods and services through the exchange of women that is taking place in the context of dowry. Now, what this practice has done is that it has led to the inflation, a huge inflation of marriage expenses, and this inflation has led to a situation where brides become the controlled rather than the controllers of property. So if you take a simple example, even the kinds of personal items that that a bride brings at the time of her marriage, even those are often who has control over them. Often the bride does not have control. It is the mother-in-law who has control, and those items are distributed among the members of the husband's family. If you think of the conjugal estate, in setting up the conjugal estate, very often this conjugal estate is set up in a joint scenario where again she does not have direct control. If you think of the jewelry, even that she does not have direct control. Cash, typically it's the male head of the household who has direct control over the cash that is received. So then the practice of dowry, which often has been justified in this kind of way as a pre-mortem inheritance, in fact creates a situation where women become the controlled rather than the controllers, and women then become mere conduits for the transfer of wealth from one family to another. Okay. So I have another example of marriage to offer a contrast to the kinds of to the kind of picture that we paint of marriage in patriarchal societies, and this is from China, and I think it challenges our notions of monogamous marriage and
Frontline World. Stories from a small planet.
This is Ruku Lake, lying just east of the beautiful city of Shangri-La in southwest China. To most Chinese, this area is called Women's Kingdom, a place where women do not accept many rules of Chinese society. I grew up far away in Shanghai. I've been thinking of coming here for over a decade. I want to see how much freedom of life a woman can possibly enjoy. After a plane flight and a 7-hour drive, I arrived at the Luoshui village by the lake. People here are called Moso. The Moso are a small minority group that has an estimated population of 30 to 50,000. They believe in Tibetan Buddhism and have their own language. Chinese say the Moso society is the country's last matriarchy.
这里结婚，人家会觉得挺怪的，我也会觉得很别扭的。在这种地方结什么婚？本来风俗就是这样的。
Moso women do not marry in the traditional way. They practice what they call walking marriage, a tradition that has persisted for at least 1,000 years. A man walks into a woman's bedroom at night, and she decides if she wants him to stay. In the morning, he must leave.
不要看，好，是偏爱的，因为他走婚还场也都不统一嘛，各干各的嘛。只是晚上两个人在一起谈情说爱嘛。我们的爱情应该是两个人合得来就在一起，合不来就各走各的，很和气的就散开了。何必要去结婚呢？何必要去什么法院啊搞个什么结婚证呢？说难听一点，就拿了一个。
Mosul children don't live with their fathers. They're raised by their mothers and their mothers' families. Once the media started touting Mosul society as a free love culture, hundreds of thousands of tourists began coming. Most of the tourists are Chinese, from the Han majority, like me.
那你们汉人就不一样了。要是有个小孩生长在大城市里面，他要是只有妈妈没有爸爸，人家肯定要说他没有爸爸的野孩子嘛。但是在这里生一个这样的小孩，谁会这样说呀？都不是一样的。
I first met Cha-Tuo in her little restaurant bar along the lake. She also has the only internet bar in the village. We became friends. She said I could call her tomboy as others did. And she took me to see a Mosul performance. Singing and dancing are an important part of Mosul culture. Now they sing and dance for the tourists every night, unless the rain is too heavy. But what attracts the tourists most are the exotic possibilities of free love.
最多的问题肯定是你走婚了没有？走了几个？完了我要跟你走婚。我最讨厌的就一张口就是能不能走婚呀？晚上我们可不可以去走婚呀？好像很自以为是的，每次我都是说，你觉得你那么有魅力啊？你有那个本事吗？他们就不说话。
Cha-Tuo says Mosul women can have as many sexual relationships as they want. But some tourists insist on taking advantage of their traditions.
走婚要有感情的，最起码你要认识。然后他就说没关系，他可以付钱。他说要多少钱？然后当时我很生气，然后就马上就打了他2个耳光。
The women's kingdom also attracts women tourists who are interested in the available men.
摩梭的小伙子很亮很帅，他们会骑马、摔跤，太阳晒得黑黑的，非常的强壮，非常的那个勇猛壮。
This is John's second visit here in a few months. She says 8 Mosul men have fallen in love with her.
我们汉族人表达爱情的话会有很多麻烦，他不会像摩梭人哇奔放。我喜欢你，我会喝酒，我会跳舞，然后喝酒跳舞以后，我有情绪，我就表达我喜欢你，我要跟你走婚。我喜欢，非常的直接。
Today, each of the 70 families in the Loshe village owns at least a hotel or restaurant. They entertain the tourists together and split the money equally. Since tourism began here in the early 90s, Loshe has become the wealthiest Mosul village. But Cha-Tuo says, if I want to see the real Mosul culture, I have to go deeper into the mountains. With the help of a local monk, I headed to a remote Mosul village. "7 hours on horseback, up and down hills. Only the locals know these roads." High on the mountain, we found the Wujiao village. About 200 Mosul live here. When we arrived, unannounced, a family immediately took us in. In Wujiao, Everyone works for the common good. Families choose the most capable women to run the household. Men help with the farm work. In Warsaw, there is no abandonment. The old don't have to live alone, and the young are taken care of by the big families. Unlike other rural areas in China, where many girl babies are abandoned, here, the young Warsaw women are proud of being girls.
这一户女孩子，什么都是做得来就好嘛。
Traditionally, Warsaw women can't wear dresses or skirts until they turn 13, when they go through a grown-up ceremony. Then, they can start dating, looking for men they would like to father their children. And they get their own rooms. Latwell was excited to show me her room and everything in it.
这个都是家里面给的，妈妈给的，妈妈的，啥都能喜欢呀，对，都是你喜欢呀，都可以。
I've never had that many rings on my fingers. Latwell says she loves to put on rings, but she will never wear a wedding ring.
一会儿还不换完嘛，这一起。 抽抽闹闹的一片露出去没了。
Asking questions about sexual relationships in front of men is an absolute taboo in Warsaw culture. But women can talk about the subject when men are not around.
我们这里面是白天的哪是出去啊？一定要女孩子不喜欢男孩子就给他唱歌嘛。我不喜欢你的也是唱给他听。
And at night, she says if the woman is interested, she would quietly open the door for the man.
原来知道家里面女孩子家里面一般都是。
Okay, so I think that video very clearly challenges some of the notions that we work with in terms of a monogamous marriage, the kind of, the fact that we pile on fertility, sexuality, marriage, residence, all of that together to mean something in a modern context of marriage. I think all of those things are challenged through this Chinese system of the walking marriage. I'm going to move quickly to talking about the family, and once I sort of give you an introduction, and then there's a short 3-minute clip to define the family. Now, as we know, family is a kind of kinship grouping that provides for the rearing of children. So one of the fundamental functions of the family is the socialization of the young. There are mainly 3 kinds of family: the nuclear family, when 2 adults live together in a household with their children; the extended family, which is when close relatives other than the married couple and their children live together in the same household; and joint family, when more than one married couple and their children live together with the parents in the household. Now, what are the functions of the family? Biological reproduction, which is that the family is seen as the usual and the legitimate site of biological reproduction. And issues of fertility determines and impacts the kind of families that we have. So, for instance, if you look at the film on polyandry, clearly there was a kind of demographic context which led to this kind of a family. If polyandry, the kind of marriage that you have leads to a certain kind of familial family structure. So, in this case, there was a demographic impetus that was there to the practice of polyandry in this particular area. Secondly, one of the functions of the family is to regulate sexuality, that it is the institution that regulates sexuality, that enables the ideological connection between procreation and sexuality. So it is through the family that this connection between procreation and sexuality is made, and therefore sexuality is regulated in order to fulfill the function of procreation. So if you look at, and I think in our class on gender we can discuss this a little bit as to how, even if you look at the state and the law and how those are oriented towards this kind of an understanding of family. So the laws are actually oriented towards regulating sexuality towards procreation. Right? So any sexuality, expression of sexuality that is not oriented towards procreation is considered, in that sense, unnatural. Socialization, family is the primary agent of socialization. It is the place where the infant is taught to become an individual, where the infant is taught social norms, regulations, both of the family as well as of the world outside. So it's the place where you're made into individuals who are ready for the world outside, ready to participate in the workforce, ready to participate in the educative process, and so on, and finally in the workforce. Welfare, a major function of the family is that it is that of the care and nurturance of the infant, the protection of the pregnant and lactating mother, because that person holds a key role in both the fact of biological reproduction as well as of socialization and procreation. And also the nurturance of the handicapped, the aged, the sick, the unemployed. So the family becomes a site where all those who are incapable actually of caring for themselves are being taken care of within the space of the family. So in that sense, many of these aspects of the care and nurturance role of the family is tied to the role of the family as a site of biological reproduction. And finally, if you look at production, distribution, consumption now, if you think of the modern family in the industrialization age, there was a sharp disjunction. What it did was it created a sharp disjunction between the private and the public, so that these domains were basically separated. The family was no longer an economic unit. And in the pre-industrial era, the family was also an economic unit. So it was fundamentally the site for production, distribution, and consumption. And with the separation, what happens is that it is no longer the unit of production. It is the unit for distribution. So resources are allocated through the family, and it is the unit. It is the place where consumption decisions are actually being taken. Okay, before I get into the history of the family, we will have a 3-minute video on
Iowa and an engineering student at the University of Iowa, and I was raised by 2 women. My biological mom, Terry, told her grandparents that she was pregnant, that the artificial insemination had worked and they wouldn't even acknowledge it. It had worked and they wouldn't even acknowledge it. Good evening, Mr. Chairman. My name is Zach Walls. I'm a 6th-generation Iowan and an engineering student at the University of Iowa, and I was raised by 2 women. My biological mom, Terry, told her grandparents that she was pregnant, that the artificial insemination had worked and they wouldn't even acknowledge it. It actually wasn't until I was born and they succumbed to my infantile cuteness that they broke down and told her that they were thrilled to have another grandson. Unfortunately, neither of them lived to see her marry her partner Jackie of 15 years when they wedded in 2009. My younger sister and only sibling was born in 1994. We actually have the same anonymous donor, so we're full siblings, which is really cool for me. And I guess the point is that our family really isn't so different from any other Iowa family. When I'm home, we go to church together, we eat dinner, we go on vacations. But we have our hard times too. We get in fights. Actually, my mom, Perry, was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis in 2000. It is a devastating disease that put her in a wheelchair, so we've had our struggles. But, we're Iowans. We don't expect anyone to solve our problems for us. We'll fight our own battles. We just hope for equal and fair treatment from our government. Being a student at the University of Iowa, the topic of same-sex marriage comes up quite frequently in classroom discussions. And the question always comes down to, well, can gays even raise kids? And the conversation gets quiet for a moment because most people don't really have an answer. And then I raise my hand and say, actually, I was raised by a gay couple, and I'm doing pretty well. I scored in the 99th percentile on the ACT. I'm actually an Eagle Scout. I own and operate my own small business. If I was your son, Mr. Chairman, I believe I'd make you very proud. I'm not really so different from any of your children. My family really isn't so different from yours. After all, your family doesn't derive its sense of worth from being told by the state, you're married, congratulations. No. The sense of family comes from the commitment we make to each other, to work through the hard times so we can enjoy the good ones. It comes from the love that binds us. That's what makes a family. So what you're voting here isn't to change us. It's not to change our families. It's to change how the law views us, how the law treats us. You are voting for the first time in the history of our state to codify discrimination into our Constitution. A Constitution that, but for the proposed amendment, is the least amended Constitution in the United States of America. You are telling Iowans that some among you are second-class citizens who do not have the right to marry the person you love. So will this vote affect my family? Would it affect yours? Now, over the next 2 hours, I'm sure we're going to hear plenty of testimony about how damaging having gay parents is on kids. But in my 19 years, not once have I ever been confronted by an individual who realized independently that I was raised by a gay couple. And you know why? Because the sexual orientation of my parents has had zero effect on the content of my character. Thank you very much.
Okay, so I think that film there, I mean, of course in India we are far, far, far away from that. But, sorry, I hadn't put this on. Okay, so the film there really again delinks this idea that sexuality, procreation, and being in a family and raising children have to all coincide in a particular kind of logical way. And that's what it's challenging. And when you say that, you know, basically what he's saying is, what does the sexuality of my parents have anything to do with how I was raised, and why should those associations be made? And basically in what happens in the modern monogamous marriage and the family, the nuclear family setup, you know, with the husband, wife, and children, is that we tend to coalesce all of those aspects. And what gay and lesbian, you know, the experience of gay and lesbian families is really doing is saying, and even if you look at, whether you look at Nair kinship or whether you look at Noor kinship, all of those examples are really telling us that there is a way of delinking all of this, and that linking has happened in a particular historical circumstance and with certain social forces at play. Now, if you look at, you know, so it's basically with the emergence of the industrial society, and with this clear break between the public and the private, and the break between the household or the family no longer remaining an economic unit, that we find the emergence of the nuclear family. So the common sense understanding of, well, even the sort of social history of the family reveals that it is with industrial societies that the nuclear family emerges. But what happens is that, you know, with this there is a concern with the breakdown of the traditional family. So there is kind of this feeling that you know, the obligations of the kinship ties are no longer going to work in this new context. But on the other hand, if you look at research on the family, it is also telling us that that is not the case. That increasingly, even though there is this sense of a growing importance of the nuclear family, even so, traditional kinship ties are still being called on in terms of helping out in different kinds of situations. So, for instance, like I said, if you look at migrant labor, you know, and try to trace the connections of how migrant labor actually goes about getting a job and eking out a living in a new city, you will see that most of those connections have to do with the wider kinship networks, the use of wider kinship networks. So in fact, that even there is evidence to show that among the urban poor and among people, those kinds of wider kinship networks are still significant. And this challenges the idea that traditional ties are being weakened, even though there is the rise of the nuclear family. So we need not see the rise of the nuclear family along with the breakdown of these traditional ties. So in a sense, then, industrialization seems to have actually strengthened those traditional ties rather than weakening them. And in that sense, then, this kind of idea that actually where is the family gone, that the family in the sense that we knew it is no longer present, that idea is being challenged, because you see elements, if you think of the way in which that young boy of lesbian parents defines the family, you see expressions of that in different aspects of lives. So the other significant thing that happens is that with the feminist movement and with the gender question entering our understanding of family and kinship systems, what we find is that there is a questioning or a challenging of the focus on the harmonious positive role of the family. So the idea that there is that the family has a function, that it is something that leads to social cohesion and order, that it embodies certain moral beliefs, and that that it is largely a supportive network which is necessary and inevitable. This idea was being challenged through the feminist analysis of the family, that why do we, and I think the Walking Marriage in China does that beautifully, that it challenges this idea that why is it necessary? Why is marriage and family in a particular kind of form necessary to the point that we cannot actually imagine other kinds of forms? So what feminist analysis does is that it challenges the fact that families are the families that we think of, the nuclear family that we think of, is in no way natural or inevitable or necessary. It also focuses on this. So it basically focuses on the existing work on the family as being largely romanticized, as one that focuses on this kind of supportive role of the family, and not on the ways in which it reproduces patriarchy, the ways in which it reproduces inequalities. So those aspects are something that were not being brought out. And feminist analysis tries to bring that out by talking of the role of the family in reproducing patriarchy and capitalism. So my earlier point about how, when you think of the laws in the intimate domain of the family and the kinship system, you will see that all the laws are actually oriented to a certain extent to this aspect of reproducing capitalism and patriarchy. So basically this literature then challenges the idea of the family as a harmonious space, and regards the family as an institution that is crucial to the maintenance of capitalism. So that it creates, the family is the space where certain kinds of bodies, certain kinds of people are being created, that you can go on and join the capitalist labor force, and there is a certain kind of disciplining of the body which takes place, and we internalize all of those through the practices within the family. So the feminist analysis actually does this by challenging the normative categories with which we see the family. So clearly in the film on the Walking Marriage in China, you see that partly those normative categories are being challenged. In the description of what is a family, you see that being challenged. So why is it necessary to look at sexuality and procreation and residence all together in the same way? That's a kind of question. So that's me. So what it does is that you think of, you draw attention to the separation, the ideological separation between the notions of the public and the private, and show how this underlines, this structures the understanding of the family. So that this duality between the public and the private is essential to our understanding of the family, that we've created this kind of duality, and that is what, and it is this duality between the public and the private that also orients sex roles. So that the sexual division of labor is oriented to this kind of division between the private and the public. And at the core of what is going on at the sex roles is this sexual division of labor. So who is responsible for nurturance and care, and who is responsible for everything that is outside the domain of the private, who is responsible for the public domain. So you set up this kind of binary. So nurturance is nurturance is female, nurturance is private, and what is outside is public, and so on. So what it does is that it then challenges this idea of the family as a harmonious unit. It challenges the idea of that this is what the family exists for. Now, you see this, that therefore then this kind of critical reflection gives rise to a kind of image of the family where you get to see what is going on behind closed doors. So what is going on behind closed doors is intense violence, there's child sexual abuse, there's rape, there's marital rape, and this is evidenced by, there's the increasing divorce, there are live-in relationships. So the family then, within the feminist analysis, comes to be seen as a site for the subordination of women, fundamentally in two ways. One, through the socialization of women into patriarchal structures. So it is through family that this kind of socialization is taking place, and the other, that there is the practice of unpaid labor at home. So largely then, if you look at domestic work is outside the calculations of a gross domestic product, and so that it remains unpaid and deeply devalued labor. Now, what is patriarchy? Patriarchy clearly is defined as a system by which, a system of social values and practices which is used to exploit, control, and dominate over women, and it is used by men to exploit, control, and dominate over women. And it is through the family that this kind of a socialization into the patriarchal order takes place. So it reproduces and maintains this patriarchal order. And partly then you will see how actually capitalism and patriarchy, in a sense, go hand in hand, because then again it is tied to questions of labor. Now the other interesting thing interesting thing in research on the family that happens is that there is now a focus not just on the role of the family in the sense of how is it a socialization unit and so on, but also that there is a shift to looking at, like I said in the beginning, to notions of relatedness. So that increasingly you're not just looking at the relationship between the family as this place of the sexual union between the man and the woman, but you are also looking at other kinds of relationships. So that the family becomes also the study of a site of intimate relations of different kinds. So the kind of centering that you had on the relationship between the male and the female in the family, that is decentered partially because of this kind of feminist analysis. So one of the things that happens is that there is then the family comes to be recognized. One of the offshoots of this kind of research also is that the interactional aspects of the family comes to be recognized, so that the family is recognized as an interactional space where relations are mediated, relations are negotiated, and it's not just about certain fixed roles that people play. And it's not also the roles between specific individuals. So if you look at the research on the family, earlier research on family focused primarily on the centering of the role of the mother and the father and their role in socialization. So actually the voices of the children were missing. And one of the things that, when you try to look behind the closed doors of the family, one of the things that happens is that you tend to focus then on all these aspects, on the children's voices and so on. So you see the family as an interactional space where relations are negotiated, and with this negotiatedness, you're then able to focus on the significance of, let's say, same-sex relations, of close friendships. So this whole idea of how do friendship networks impact the family and relations with you look at notions of children's agency and how do children and relationships that children have with their parent, how does that organize the family? So alternate conceptions of intimacy tend to emerge. And one of the concepts that actually Anthony Giddens has put forth is the concept of what he calls plastic sexuality. And what he really means by this is that in new research on family, we have this notion of greater flexibility. And that fundamentally it is through our challenge to that original idea of the family just as a support network and as a relationship between the husband and the wife, when we challenge that notion, then we come up with all these new ways of understanding and looking at the family. Now, if you think of India, the family in India, the earliest studies were done by colonialists, and largely the family in India is to be understood in terms of the textual sources that we had. So the early writings on family were drawn from these textual sources, and the framing idea of the family was that of the Hindu joint family, which was a property holding and what is called as a Shraddh performing unit, right? And this, was seen as a kind of unchanging representation which goes on for quite a while. Now, somewhere along the line, once when we have sociologists beginning to study the family, what they're doing is that they're challenging the idea of that we need to make this distinction between the family and the household. And when you think of the family in India and the debates around it, one of the fundamental debates is about whether the joint family is disintegrating. And another way of asking that question is whether the joint household is disintegrating. So what sociologists were really trying to focus on is to say that we need to de-link and look at joint family and family and household as two separate concepts. The household is a commensal and a co-resident group, and the study of households will reveal that there are different kinds of households. The household could be a site of production, distribution, consumption, and it is also a site where women's economic status can be measured, both in terms of participation in the workforce and in terms of their contribution to the economy. And it is through the household that we can then see how, what kind of rights women have in the family in terms of decision making. So basically, with regard to family in India, we're trying to make a break from the way in which the family has been studied in the West by saying that we need to de-link our study of the family just by looking at these two concepts of the family and the household. Now, what they say then is that irrespective of the different kinds of families, so whether it's nuclear, joint, or extended, irrespective of that, it is the ideology of the joint family that dominates the Indian system. So that the traditional value system within the family is that it is still joint. So even though you may have separate residence, the ideology is that of the joint family system. So for instance, before taking a big decision of marriage, it's still the eldest male member of the household who is consulted and who has a final say in that decision. And lineal relations are still privileged over conjugal relations, so that actually the wife will be less important than the husband's elder brother, right, with regard to certain decisions. Okay, I will show you a short clip on the joint family.
The need for community, the need for
sound, okay?
social order, the need for community, the need for social order, the need for socialization. There's no doubt that in early years the neurons build up the relationship and build up as a network. Therefore, it makes sense to have a wider family setting to create a certain social structure in the mind of a very young child who is in the phase of learning about people.
ஆசாபாசங்கள்லாம் அதிகமாக இல்லாமல் இருக்கிறத வச்சு ரொம்ப சந்தோஷமாக இருக்கேன்.
கிராமங்களில் இருக்கும்போது அக்கப்பக்கத்தில் இருக்கிறோம் எல்லாரும் ஹெல்ப், ஒருத்தருக்கு கல்யாணம் ஆனாக்கா ஊரில் இருக்கிறோம் எல்லாரும் வந்து முடிச்சுட்டோம். ப்ராப்ளம்ஸ் ஆனாலும் குழந்தைகளை பற்றி கவலை இல்லாமல் இருந்தது.
When my husband's sister passed away, she had an older boy who was 6 or 7 years old, and she died leaving the baby behind. I was just married. I had also just had a baby. My son was 2 months at that time. And my mother-in-law was elderly. She was 75 or 76 when this happened. She wanted to bring the baby back, the children back, and wanted us, my husband was the only son, to look after these children. And I said no. At that time I was worried that how will I cope with this? In hindsight now, I wish I had not taken that decision. I think my husband will really carry this regret to his, deathbed that I let down my sister who died. I didn't have her children with me. Whereas I feel if I had been part of a joint family setup, operational considerations, these small things would not have been the thing. It would have been a bigger thing of, what is good for these children. They would have been absorbed under the umbrella of this family.
There is a certain community dance, for example, happening inside the house. Who says what, when, how are things arranged, how are things organized in the family. You've got to fit into that.
You have company, you have somebody you can talk to, you have somebody to give you an option of something to do. It's not that you have to choose it, but at least there's somebody who is experienced who can give you another option or another view to things. Grandmother is here. So my children stay in my room, while my mother and her mother, they stay here.
I think it was a lack of space. For a child, a joint family is the best place to be.
To balance the career and the children is the biggest challenge, not only to me, it's for any lady.
As a life journey, it was important for me to ensure that my children were brought up the way I thought was good.
I left my job because my mother-in-law had 2 heart attacks. She's severely having osteoporosis. She's using a walker. I compromised on the job.
Today's setup, I don't think that people will get adjusted.
In Industrial Revolution that happened in England was, I think, basically the death knell for the joint family system. The joint family was forced, I think, to send out its members to learn new skills.
Relationship
I live alone. My sister lives down the road by herself. And just next door, my father lives. He's 82 and he lives by himself. We meet up practically every day. All 3 of us always have dinner together. I cannot imagine that all 3 of us would be able to live in the same house.
They know that they cannot live together, but at least they can join together.
Initially
we thought once he goes to higher classes, dependency will come down and I can start full-fledged on my career. That's what I thought, but not so. My career, which I had so many breaks because of wedding and child and all that, it's just come into a kind of routine now. And again, if I have a child, I'll have to take a break again. And I really cannot expect the same support system that my parents or my in-laws, because now they are older. If there is a second child and with the responsibility of the first child, there are more chances of me having to quit and be at home, which I don't know if I'm going to be ready with that.
If I need to chat with somebody, connect with somebody, I don't need to go to my cousin or my chitti or anything. I use Facebook.
Family problem, local problem, friend get நான் என்ன ஏர்ன் பண்ணுறேன்னு என் அண்ணனுக்கு தெரியாது, அண்ணன் என்ன ஏர்ன் பண்ணுறான்னு நான் தம்பிக்கு தெரியாது. ஆனால் என்னோட ஃப்ரெண்டுக்கு நல்லா தெரியும் நான் என்ன ஏர்ன் பண்ணுறேன். ஸோ ஹீ நோஸ் பெட்டர் தேன் மை பிரதர். அண்ட் ஸோ இஃப் தெர் இஸ் தி ப்ராப்ளம், ஹீ கம்ஸ் இன்டு தி பிக்சர் டு ஹெல்ப் மீ.
உங்களை பெற்று வளர்த்து எவ்வளோ கஷ்டப்பட்டு, உங்களுக்கு எவ்வளோ இதாக வேலை வாங்கிட்டு, உங்களை படிக்க வச்சு எவ்வளோ கஷ்டப்பட்டு.
Today we look at elders in terms of the utility they have for us. I'm happy to have my parents live with me because I work and my children can get their homework done or something.
My grandmother's here with me. She's enjoying every bit of our life. She's amused, she's thrilled, and she's living every moment of it. When I grow old, I also want to be able to do the same thing. Have my children with me, have my grandchildren within reach. What I want to enjoy probably later in life, make sure I give it to my grandmother and my mother.
Living alone, I think there is a certain sense of, you have your freedom, you have your space to do what there may be you want to do. which may not happen when the family is there. For instance, when my grandchildren all are there, I give all my time and energy there. So I suspend everything of my own activities. But there are times of complete desolateness when you come back and shut the door and you are yearning to talk.
Once I was talking to the principal, and one kid walks in and says, I want to talk to my mother, and I'm in stomach pain, I want to go home. The principal said, this is your mother's court timings, she's not going to pick up the call and you can't speak, so you go and come back in the evening. He must be 8 or 9, but he wanted to go to his mother.
And you want to have somebody to be able to have an outburst with. Outburst of just letting things get out of your system, and there's nobody. To me, there's an imperativeness of having the family for just an everyday need that the human heart has of communication.
I think again you see that this film, I mean, most of the stuff on family ends on this emotional note of what the family means. And so it, in that sense, perpetuates this idea of the family as a supportive network and so on. And the kind of discussion that I'm going to move towards, and I've also done before this, was actually to problematize that notion of the family as a supportive space, because we see the family as a space of violence, as a space of reproduction of patriarchy and so on. Now, if you think of this question of, like in the film, that young woman raises this issue of how, can I have silence, please? Raises the issue of how the joint family actually disintegrates with the Industrial Revolution in England, and primarily what the Industrial Revolution in England did was to separate the private and the public, and to create this kind of separation of work and sexual division of labor, which was also there earlier, but it created a new kind of sexual division of labor. Now, with regard to the Indian scenario, if you think of whether the joint household or the joint family is disintegrating, what we find is that we're moving towards this idea of a strong commitment to joint family values and norms. Now, in the film, you see it being articulated differently. Some people, for instance, that woman who articulates this fact that she didn't actually let her husband's sister and the sister's kids be raised along with her own, and how she regrets that decision because she feels that, in a joint family setup, many of the nitty-gritty of the everyday life is actually taken care of differently. So largely from a sociological point of view, what we see is that there is a strong commitment to the joint family values and ideologies. And again, if you look at the notion of honor and how it plays out, for instance, in the North Indian family, in the Punjabi family, that becomes very clear, and I'll show that with an example. But what happens here is that the joint family clearly is not the statistically dominant form at all. The average size of the household is actually, joint family is rarely the statistical dominant form. In fact, it's the nuclear households that predominate. So there are more nuclear households than joint households. But in some ways, people may increasingly be living in this joint, supplemented nuclear families. Again, there's too much noise. Please be patient. This is the last hour. So the proportion of joint over nuclear households is not really decreasing, but the average size of the household has been increasing. So the proportion of joint family too increases. Now again, if you look at individuals and their different points of time in their life, they are part of different kinds of households. So the same individual may have been part of a joint household at one point and then moves to a nuclear setup at another. So then, because of these kinds of facts, it's difficult to think of the complete disintegration of the joint family. There is also another kind of family form, which according to Patricia Oberoy's discussion of the family that has come up, which is the STEM family form. And the STEM family form is really parents living with their married children. And this is an emerging pattern of family organization. So it's not the joint family in the way that we think of, all brothers and their wives residing and the children residing together, but the family, the children with the married children with their parents. So overall, what we find is that to answer this, to address this question of the joint family, this disintegration, we have these facts, and we move towards making the point of the commitment towards the joint family values and the ideology. Now, the ideology of the joint family is a component of the larger and the wider kinship system in different ways, where you find that so there are a set of persons who are related by blood and who have a final relation. So in the wider kinship system, you have consanguines and affines, right? And the joint family system then regulates these relationships among these members. Now, if you think of Veena Das's essay on Punjabi kinship, we see how there is that ideology of the joint family through the concept, for instance, of the biradari, through the concept, for instance, of honor. Both those are ways through which actually the joint commitment to a joint family is being evoked. Now, in another essay by Prem Chaudhary, who actually looks at, which I think takes off very interestingly from this idea of honor within the North Indian family, and she looks at the cases of violence against boys, young men and women who choose to marry on their own and who have chosen to marry outside, often outside the caste group. And there are many examples of this. I'm sure I'm not going to go into the details of the examples. I mean, for instance, those of you who watched Satyameva Jayate, there was that example of Manoj and Babli, who basically were young adults who married within the Gotra. And how they were, I think they were returning to the village or something like that, and they were basically killed. Their bodies were found in a canal in the village. And so what Prem Chaudhary does is that she says that this notion of honor, if you flesh it out a little bit more, what it does is that it sets up certain cultural codes. So cultural codes of behavior and action. So that, so honor, what do you need to do to protect honor, to maintain honor? And what you need to do, those practices are really the cultural codes. And these cultural codes pertain to the interfamilial and the interpersonal domain of people's lives. And it is in this context that we can look at or examine the notion of the cup. Silence, please. Now, what the context of the CAP does is that it throws up the issue of caste, class, and gender very significantly. And I think there were some questions around that of how these intersect. Again, in our gender class, we're going to take it up more centrally. But here it's important to say that women play a very significant role in maintaining caste boundaries. So if you think of a family in a village where the men have migrated to urban areas for work, there's too much talking. Would you like to be out? Why don't, if you want, those who want to talk can please leave so that I can just connect with the ones who want to listen. Okay, next time I hear a hum, I'm going out. Okay, so caste boundaries are really maintained through the lives of women. So if you think of the example of a family where the men have actually moved out, for instance, the ritual purity in terms of what kinds of rituals need to be followed, the occupational status in terms of what kind of work is to be done in order to maintain caste boundaries, all of this is being continued by the women who have stayed back in the village. So even though the men have actually, in their new place of work, they are able to relax many of these caste norms, the women who stay back have to continue to maintain these caste norms. So whether it's bodily purity, the control of women's sexuality and reproductive capabilities and choice, it is through these aspects that within the family the caste norms are being upheld, and it is the women's, primarily it is through the women's bodies and it is through women's responsibility that this is being done. So in a sense then women are invested in the practice of the caste system through their marriages according to the norms of families and communities, or they are maintaining the caste system by maintaining the purity of food, maintaining the purity of rituals, and in maintaining the power of the household in the economic and the public domain. So this is about the occupational continuity. So if you think of, again, when the man leaves, who is it that is responsible for maintaining that occupational continuity and the position within the larger economic system? It is the job of the women to do that. So then what marriage does is that it provides a structural link between kinship and caste. So it is through marriage that kinship and caste is being linked. And these linkages through marriage and the relations that are established through marriage give a caste group its strength and the recognition and leverage in wider society. Now, any breach in this system and in this linkage impacts the family, but also the biradari, and this is where the clan or the biradari comes in, and the entire caste group. So as actually, it's not just, even though it happens at the realm of the private, it is at the level of the intimate relationship. A breach in the caste norm affects not just the family. So the family is, of course, likely to be ostracized and all of that happens. But why is that? Why is that so? Because the breach is a breach of the caste group. It's not just family and personal honor, but it's the honor of the biradari that is at stake. So now at the center of these, on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th row, next to the green t-shirt. Can you get up, please? Yes, you. Sitting like that next to green. Yes, please get up. Not you, at the back. And come and sit somewhere here. Here, there's a sit. Yeah, please sit here. Thank you. Okay, so So the focus of these cultural codes is really, at the center of the focus of the cultural codes is female sexuality. So what you're trying to control is sexuality and the giving away of that sexuality through marriage. So so the choice of the giving away of sexuality is not a choice that belongs to the woman. When the woman or the young adult tries to make that choice on their own accord in a way that it violates those larger group norms, then it is met with this kind of resistance. So what it's necessarily doing is that it challenges the idea of caste purity and status and power within that community. So then any kind of infringement has to be dealt with, and it's dealt with first, by way of initially by way of sort of trying to control a possible infringement, and when that infringement does happen, it has to be dealt with by violence. Right? So you find that increasingly what happens is that, but at the same time we find that these codes, these cultural codes, are repeatedly being challenged owing to processes of democratization that are going on simultaneously. So there is, there is an increasing sense of a desire for non-hierarchical societies. There are laws in place which are pushing for this kind of egalitarian societies, and these processes of democratization has led to this kind of assertiveness of certain lower castes, and it's also led to assertive and sort of increasing the feminist movement has also led to issues of focusing on choice of the woman and so on. So all of this has led to democratization and individualization within relationships, so that intimate relationships at one level are sought to be articulated as just that, as intimate relationships by individuals. And when you attempt to do that in a way that challenges existing norms of the biradari, norms of the caste groups, then those norms are violently enforced when all else fails. So now, so basically, in the event of such violence, there is great complicity between the perpetrators of violence. So, I don't know whether you remember, but, in the Satyameva Jayate, they had this little clip where they showed members of this CARP. And Amir Khan actually asked them, so, why do you think you need to take the law in your own hands, kind of question. And they say, but we never order any killing. And we never, we think that, certain norms have to be followed because this is society, and we are there to follow those norms. And if those norms are not followed, we ostracize, and that's all we do. We don't order killings. And, it ends with sort of him saying that, well, I don't agree, and that's that. But so what happens here is that there is a complicity between the perpetrators of violence and those who are at the level of the legal system. So if you think of the police, and Prem Chaudhary argues this very well, where she says that actually the police are not devoid of relationship to caste groups and to biradaris. In the villages and in the areas where this is happening, the police are also part of a biradari. They are part of a caste group, and therefore as much amenable to being sort of guided by the norms of these groups. So here and I want to go back to the point that Veena Das had made, where she's really saying that you make a sacrifice. And that is what this is about, that what you're sacrificing is you're sacrificing a certain kind of natural bond for the sake of honor. So honor is that kind of a principle where the natural bond of love between a mother and a child, between a father and a daughter, is actually being sacrificed at the cost of honor of a group, or status and power of a group. So basically that the notion of honor then here operates in the expense of legality. So you're sacrificing legality, you're sacrificing human sentiments and feelings, all for the sake of honor. So you can understand the tremendous significance that is placed on honor in that kinship system, that you sacrifice not just legality but also your human sentiments for the honor. Through this is how the family is perpetuated as a site of ideological reproduction and women's subordination, not merely as a site for the support and care of the young and the aged and the infirm. Women are seen as solely responsible, the custodians of tradition and community, and the conjugal bond is less significant than the other bonds of fraternal solidarity, parental affection, and so on. And that there is this kind of two groups that are created, the wife takers and the wife givers, and these two groups are in a hierarchical relationship. Now you will see that this again pertains to the way in which caste and class are embedded in this kind of separation between the two groups of wife takers and wife givers. I'm going to end with three things which, again, I'm not going to say much on, but again, I think that some of this, again, will come up in our discussion with gender. So, there are, one of the issues in India, as you all know, is of sex-selective abortion. And, you're all familiar with this. Now, interestingly, what has happened in, for instance, Haryana, is that because of, and again, this was also featured in Satyameva Jayate, because of this sex-selective abortion, there are villages with very few women who can be taken on as brides. And brides are now being imported from Kerala, from the south, from Bangladesh, and it has given rise to extremely exploitative conditions within the family, where there may be 5 men and 1 wife, and it's just, in terms of the family as the site of women's subordination, it has taken a kind of very exaggerated form. The others, I think, emerging issue is that of the question of the families we choose, so that increasingly, and in the West, we've already have this, where there are gay and lesbian families, and I'll show a film which actually shows that. And here we are in a situation where we are trying to negotiate. Gay and lesbian groups are actually trying to negotiate that legal position. Of course, we are far from a situation of trying to configure chosen families. Where we're just negotiating with basic rights. And finally, the issue of reproductive technologies, the rise in use of reproductive technologies and surrogacy, and what that does to the notion of a family. So, for instance, when wombs are being rented and children are being born, and then there's the notion of the designer babies. How does that then configure the family in these new kinds of ways? So, I have time to show you. Yeah, okay. I'm going to show you. Well, I'll show you the first film, and the second one, I think we can show it with gender, because it also reflects on issues of gender. So the first film looks at the issue of surrogacy.
And to another in our film project collaboration, where we go. Tonight, the filmmakers Rebecca Hamowitz and Vaishali Sinha come from the United States and India. Together, they weave a very human story that crosses international boundaries. It's about an American couple, Lisa and Brian Switzer, who traveled halfway around the world to fulfill their dream of having a baby. A reproductive outsourcing company matches them with an Indian surrogate mother named Azia. Her last name is not given to protect her identity. Here's an excerpt now from Made in India.
A woman a lot of times defines herself by her ability to have children. I just can't imagine being without kids. I've wanted to be a mother since I was about 25 years old. And here I am turning 40. I've been trying for 7 years to get pregnant, and it hasn't been an easy task by anybody's stretch of the imagination. We don't really have the luxury of waiting, or the luxury of seeing if there's other alternatives. This is our one and final shot. When I was a oncologist, he did a biopsy on my uterus. I was really shocked. They were just like, we want to do a hysterectomy. Right now you're precancerous. My doctor was like, I know you want this, and I'll leave your ovaries there, but your uterus has got to come out. That was
a hard day that day. When I told her they wanted to take the uterus out, because that was insane. You will never carry a child. So that's when we started looking at surrogacy.
I don't have a surrogate. I can't afford a surrogate. They want $25,000 to $35,000 just for the mother. My best friend Jennifer sent me an article about couples going to India to do IVF and surrogacy. I found Planet Hospital.
I'm the co-founder of Planet Hospital, and what we do is we help people get affordable health care from around the world, including surrogacies. Yeah, sure. Here, bye. It was what happened anyways, with or without us. I just want to put the same quality of protection and comfort and safety in surrogacy as I've been doing on the outsourcing medically. Yes. Hi, Trudy. Hello, Trudy. We have all the answers from the whole process, from which surrogate clinic should I go to, all the way to what's the legal problems and how do I bring my babies back. If the surrogate changes their mind to keep the baby, what's the legal recourse? Is this considered baby buying, or is it legitimately surrogacy?
$500 advertising for the surrogate, The preparation of the surrogate and embryo transfer stage is $2,500 because they have to do all her drugs to get her caught up with me and ready to receive a baby. And then the IVF is $500. The surrogate actually gets $7,000 for her carrying our baby. This woman is carrying a life that I can't carry. She's giving me the family I can't create. You know, I'll never be able to thank her enough.
What should I say about myself? I used to clean people's homes before. I'm not educated. I don't know how to read or write. So this is my life. I have 3 children. All my children were born normally. I'd never done anything of this sort. My sister-in-law Sannu had told me about it, but I didn't believe her that this can happen with medication. Now, how should I say it? A child without a man? How could a child be conceived without a man? When there's a relationship, only then can... That day was kind of good. Suddenly I found out that I was pregnant. I was happy.
What? Congratulations. We got a baby.
I told you. With low cost and high quality medical tools is a trend that's likely to grow.
The late press has been interviewing couples who got babies from here and putting out photographs of these couples with babies in American newspapers and magazines. So this has sort of really given the whole thing a big boost. We have new companies, like every month we have a new inquiry, a new medical tourism company. Suddenly we are seeing a whole lot of patient referrals from North America coming down to India.
There are many surrogate women. We don't know what is happening to them, and the particular diet and the particular regime, when to go, what to do. Suppose if she has a miscarriage, what will happen? We have another question. The focus for Sama is the larger framework. What is the role by the commissioning parents or the intended couple, whatever we call them? What is the role of the state? Our demand was they should understand the fact that a surrogate mother has a bodily integrity and an autonomy.
I started showing my coworkers the Detective website. They got this section here called Discuss, What Do You Think? And I thought, well, let's see what everybody else thinks. And the first 2 started out very nice. What's the legal status? Is there any immigration issues? Things of that nature. And then it got ugly. People started saying things like the use of surrogates is disgusting and immoral practice to begin with. But then to farm it out like cheap labor to women in India, we should be disgusted and ashamed. And then you get the, hey, it's all about saving money, What about adopting? But there were more people telling us, you should have adopted. Well, that's placing the entire orphan issue on the shoulders of infertile couples. By their argument, anybody who has ever proactively tried to get pregnant together and succeed, had their own children, has robbed an orphan of a loving home. Plain and simple. So don't place that burden on the infertile couples out there. And what kills me is everybody's screaming about the surrogacy issue. Oh, it's a baby mill. It's a puppy farm. And it's not. I felt I had to defend Lisa and I, as well as every other non-Indian that's going to India to have this done. So here's what I wrote to all these people that were just spewing this hateful talk. The surrogates are well compensated in line with their local economy. I have seen poverty unlike anything I could have imagined, and knowing what this process is going to do for the surrogate and her family in the long run, makes me realize that this is a very good thing for all parties involved.
The contract had details about payment and the child would go to them, that you should have no right to it, and that later you shouldn't change your mind like some women do, because their hearts melt as they think, no, I will not give the child. That shouldn't happen. So I said, no, that won't happen. They just said that this is how much the payment will be. They told me $2,000. I'm doing this for my children. A son can earn anywhere, but I want to save this for my daughter.
Azia gave birth to twin girls, and after navigating some legal hurdles, Brian and Lisa brought them home to Texas. Made in India is being screened at film festivals here in the U.S. and abroad.
Okay, do you have any questions? No? Do you want to see the other film as well? It's going to probably go beyond 6, but that's okay. We can see it in the next class. So we'll begin next class with this film, okay? Okay, thank you.